Hundreds of thousands of researchers around the world are working to improve life and address imminent threats to humanity. Often their research ends up in the scientific valley of death in the form of publications and patents that never see the light of day. That is about to change. Welcome to the Lab to Startup podcast, hosted by Naresh Sunkara, founder and executive director of the Berkeley Postdoc Entrepreneurship Program at the University of California, Berkeley. This show has two main goals: share the stories of those who have successfully founded startups based on their own research, and highlight resources needed to help those aspiring to launch startups in the deep tech space. Whether it's electric cars, vaccines, addressing climate change concerns, or possibly establishing life on other planets, Naresh and his esteemed guests want to help scientists, engineers, faculty, and researchers bring their innovations to market. Learn more and subscribe today at labtostartup.com. And now, here's Naresh.
My guest today is Martin Casado, a general partner at the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz and the co-founder of Nicira, a company that he built around software-defined networking that he developed during his grad school at Stanford. The company was later acquired by VMware for about $1.26 billion. I've been interacting with Martin on Twitter for a long time now, and he was on the top of list of people that I wanted to bring onto my podcast, and I'm really happy that he is here today. He is very highly regarded in the enterprise networking world and regularly shares his experiences and observations on A16Z podcasts and blogs. You should definitely check them out. In this episode, we discuss about his own transition from grad school to founding Nicira, lessons learned from the enterprise world around market research and product adoption, experiences working with his faculty co-founders, and what aspiring entrepreneurs should consider while working with their own faculty co-founders, evolution into a CEO, leadership lessons learned, and how he operates as an investor and a board member. I'm confident that there are going to be a number of takeaways in this episode for academic entrepreneurs. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Martin. Martin, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here.
You're one of the special people with whom we can have a conversation on so many topics because of your experiences as a grad student, founder, operator, industry visionary, product creator, and finally an investor. Since the theme of the podcast is undoing the academic muscle and building the startup muscle for academic entrepreneurs, it makes the most sense to start this discussion with your own story of transition from grad school at Stanford to Nicira. I want to make this a little fun. So wherever possible, try and be bipolar and try to respond the questions from an entrepreneur point of view and also as an investor point of view, wherever possible.
Can I also respond as an academic?
Yes, please. Yes.
I'll do all three. I'll be tripolar.
Yes, tripolar. I never heard of that. We've just created a word. Talk about your mindset in grad school, about what you wanted to be when you grew up, aka after your PhD. Walk us through the things that prepared you for the startup journey.
Fortunately, it was actually kind of accidental. Listen, even PhD was actually accidental. I was deep in the bowels of a national lab. I was a computational physicist, actually. I was a computer science guy, but I did basically distributed programming for big computation. I was at a lab when 9/11 happened, and I moved to intelligence. And that was much more about security and networks, which I didn't have a lot of background in. So I actually started taking courses at Stanford. I had to learn about networking and security because I didn't know anything. Really enjoyed the courses. So I thought, well, maybe I'll do a master's course in this. So I actually applied to the master's, and a professor, Nick McCune, ended up being my advisor, who, I was in his class. He actually moved my application from the master's program to the PhD program. I had no aspirations of being a PhD student, and I got into the PhD program. It was tough to turn it down because I had gotten in. So anyways, so I was kind of almost an accidental PhD. And so when I was there, I wasn't really quite sure what I was going to do next, but I really enjoyed the work that we did. I'd actually gotten a faculty offer at Cornell. Kind of thought maybe I was going to go be an academic and be a professor. But twice during my PhD, I'll say, I did this work, and a lot of the feedback was like, oh, this isn't useful, this isn't practical. And I just thought that was silly. And so the first time, this was around a paper called Peering Through the Shroud we did. So I was like, okay, I'll show you. So I started a company, sold that company. And then the same thing happened with SDN, where people were like, oh, this is great academic work, but it's not practical. And I just feel like I don't feel satisfied if you do work that doesn't actually, everybody says the word impact, and which is too fuzzy of a word, but I wanted practitioners to use it. We started Nicira as a result of that. And so it was kind of like a personal fulfillment thing based on the research, but I had no aspirations to be a big entrepreneur at the time. It was mostly just a reaction to the research.
Let's put some context to this. What is the hypothesis? What is the problem you're working on during your PhD? What did you end up with? And yeah, we'll take it from there.
So I mentioned I was in national labs. I actually started working for the intelligence community. I was there from like 2001 to 2004. So like during Afghanistan through Iraq. I was in network security, and I realized that, listen, if you're dealing with like a war environment and a threat environment with nation states, we're building this infrastructure that just wasn't built to withstand that sort of an environment. And I was a distributed systems guy. And I'm like, listen, why don't you just program these things to be better? And it was crazy to me. You couldn't take a firewall and program it, or you could do router and switch. And it was obvious what you would do. You just couldn't do it. So when I was doing my PhD at Stanford, everybody at the time, networking, by the way, when I was a PhD student, was about the internet. Everything was about the internet. The internet seemed to work just fine to me, but I'm like, listen, I spent all these times with these local area networks, like the enterprise networks, these emerging data centers, and they're specialized environments. You know a lot more, and they have structure. Why can't we just program the gear to like kind of be more useful for what we want? And so we looked at how you would architecturally change networking equipment. So like if you're running your own network, whether it's for a data center or for like a super secure environment or whatever, you could actually, as a user, have more flexibility. And that's what resulted in the papers I wrote, and then software-defined networking, and then ultimately the company Nicira.
And did you take the problem to Nick, or was it co-conspired?
Nick was involved in a project called 100 by 100 at the time. Everybody was an internet person. Everybody was like about the internet. He was an internet person. And so he's like, we're going to give, I think it was 100 megabits of bandwidth to 100,000 houses or something. There's some big, huge internet product. I personally just wasn't interested in the internet. I just didn't think there was a problem. I mean, it just felt like a distribution problem.
It works.
It worked. It worked just fine, right? Like I was very interested in local area networks. And Nick wasn't. I don't think he'd actually really focused on it. So I started working with Vern Paxson, who, he's at Berkeley and he was at ICSI at the time. And he was actually looking at enterprise networks. So we did some work together. And then I kind of brought that back. During that summer, I kind of concocted this. Like, I want to basically build an enterprise network that you have a lot more control. It was funny. I talked to Scott about it. He kind of made fun of me. So this is Scott Shanker at ICSI. And I brought it back to Nick. And then we started kind of working on this. And then it started getting actually quite interesting. And largely the idea came from my background and then later working with Vern. But then, Nick has done a lot of like actually network design. And so he got very involved. Scott Shanker got very involved. And here we are.
That's interesting. So you came across this problem. You're going to work on this solution. And what point did you guys decide on like starting a company? Why not just publish and patent just like most of us do in academia? Why were you different?
I'll actually not talk about SDN because that story is very well known. So me and a guy named Michael Friedman, who's now a professor at Princeton, we were both grad students, and we worked on a project that was just the two of us. No professor was involved. It was two grad students. If you look at the paper's called Peering Through the Shroud. It's just two grad students on it. And the project it was very clear that people were using IP addresses to determine things like where like a client was coming from. It was called IP analytics. Like how much information can you learn about a client through the IP address? IP addresses are not very useful because many of the clients are behind NATs or proxies. I mean, it's just not a very useful identifier. So we basically did this massive research effort where we tried to look behind the NATs and proxies by using active web content. That was the project. And we showed that 90% of internet clients are behind NATs and proxies. Many of them are very large. And therefore, if you're using IP analytics, it isn't very useful. I won't say the name of the person. We got this publication. It was just two grad students. I was very excited about it. And then we had a postdoc. The postdoc came to me. He's like, this is just such low impact. Like, who cares? I'm like, come on, man. Like, what are you talking about? If I have a company that is trying to determine whether you're in a blackout zone or not, I need to know your location. And today you use the IP address. It's actually very relevant. And so it kind of irritated me. And so Mike and I decided to start a company to do this. And so we built a proof of concept. We built this. We ended up selling it to a company called Quova, which does IP analytics. If you're a Quova customer, it's now part of Neustar, and you want to know where somebody is, they're the ones that tell you. And we can actually improve that a lot through our methods. And so, again, I think for me, it is the research is not satisfying because you actually haven't proven that it's useful. And it's not proven that it's useful until it actually is useful. That really has driven a lot of my actions. outside of research. And SDN was very similar, by the way. It was a very similar story.
Doing some recordings with other professors, somebody from UCSF was like, I asked this question to my grad students and postdocs. What do you want to do with this research? And most of them are like, I get a job, publish paper. Like, no. How can this be useful to people is what they're trying to get at. Okay, so let's get into the company building part of it. Like, so you start a company with Scott, yourself, and Nick. Walk me through that process. Like, okay, what are the roles you decide to play and how did that come out? Who's going to be the CEO, CTO, and so on and on?
I knew nothing, man. I was so naive. And you have to understand, when we started the company, it was in 2007. And in 2007, basically a valid pitch to VCs was, I'm a smart Stanford Ph.D. It's like you didn't actually have to know anything. And then if you have two professors, it's even more exciting, right? Nick, Scott, and I thought that there was something interesting in SDN. We didn't really know what it was. We didn't really have a business plan. We didn't really have anything, but like it was very easy to raise money because you come from academia, you must know something and whatever. Scott had agreed to stay for a year. I was the only one that was actually committed long-term. Nick didn't even have a day-to-day role. He was like, I'll show up a day a week, and then we started the company. The origins were very ambiguous. And like literally we were like, oh, we're going to apply for government grants and we're going to research this stuff and we'll figure out a product and whatever. It was like very, very vague. And then the nuclear winter set in 2008. So here we are, we can raise money, we can build technology, we're kind of goofing around, we're writing papers. And then the end of the world set in. And that was a huge reality check. The bottom of the Great Recession is the worst economic period since basically the Great Depression. Couldn't raise any more money. We had this team. And then we had to get very serious. But at that time, basically, Scott was going to go back to being a professor. Nick wasn't even involved. And so here I am. I mean, I was the CTO by myself. And I'm basically like, I totally felt abandoned. And so I was like basically running this company by myself. And so we tried to hire an interim CEO, which was a horrible idea because the person had no accountability. He was helpful, but like he'd show up and leave. That's really when I had to actually mature. I was really forced to. I mean, it was like I was taken in the helicopter and they took everything away from me and then they kicked me out in the middle of the forest. They're like, okay, find your way home. So you either grow up or die.
That's an interesting story. Like academics, we tend to own all the research we do. There's sense of like insecurity, I think. And this, if you want to start a company, I want to be the CEO. It looks like it was not the case with you and you evolved into the CEO. What are you observing and what works in this space? Like how should one look at in terms of starting a company and title fetish and insecurities?
Here is one of my ironclad rules on startups and basically anything with organization is the following, which is nobody should ever make decisions that they're not accountable for. And so many of the problems at Nicira were that people were making decisions that they had no accountability for. And this is a huge issue with academics. You can almost think of all of academia as making proclamations with absolutely no accountability. Like you write the paper, you tell people what to do, you come in, you're the consultant, like whatever, there's no accountability. And I actually think it's actually an Achilles heel. It's why so much of academia is just basically irrelevant. It's because like unless you're held accountable, you don't even know if you're working on anything that matters or is correct. And so titles don't mean anything to me at all. They don't. The reality is like, do you make the decisions and then do you have to like actually do the work? In the case of Nicira, I basically had to make these very serious decisions. And then I was the one that was sitting there having to follow through on them. There was a time when we had no CEO. So I was basically running the company. We'd hire an interim CEO. He didn't even understand the business. So I was the de facto CEO. At a point in time, we kind of knew what we wanted to build. And we're like, hey, we need to hire somebody that understands enterprise go-to-market. I understood the technology. I understood the product part of it. I understood the macro strategic trends. I said, we needed a real enterprise person. And at that point, you had a choice. We could get somebody who's pretty good and make them a COO, and I could take the CEO title, or you can get someone who's amazing and give them the CEO title. If you give them the CEO title, then they'll have more respect in the organization. They'll have more respect outside of the organization. In this situation where I was synonymous with the company, I mean, I created the tech, I only started the company, I was the founder, right? Like I didn't have any fears of any sort of erosion of power. And so we hired Steve Mullaney, who, to date is the best hire I've ever made in my entire life, who basically made the company. He taught me almost everything that I know. Your original question was about like title fetishism and CEO. And It never even crossed my mind. I never cared about the title. I never cared about whether I was CEO or not. For me, it was just practically, do you live or do you die? That was the most important thing. And the titles were just like ways that you can kind of give people credibility that don't otherwise have it. But for anybody that's listening to this, I would say, forget titles, forget CEO or not. Just remember, no matter what you do, you have to make sure that whoever's making decisions is accountable for the decisions in the long term. And that includes, it's so often that these academics are like, I'm going to go do a year and start a company, then I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to go back to academia. The problem is they're not long-term accountable for those decisions for that 1 year, which is why I never backed an academic that hasn't fully left, because it's so common that they go back and the company falls apart. I heard this from this very brilliant founder named Ryan Noon. He's the founder and CEO of Material Security. He's just so sharp. He's going to be an iconic CEO for sure. And we were talking one day, and he told me, he said, Martin, if you look historically, Napoleon lost every battle that he was not at. There's this sense of he could create these problems that only he can solve. And he's like, I take that to heart as a founder CEO. I have to be present. I will only create problems that I can solve if I'm going to be there. Otherwise, I will let the people that are accountable create the problem. And I actually can't think of a better analogy or way to think when it comes to exactly this question, which is not about CEO or CTO or title. It's about like, if you create a problem only you can solve, you better be the one solving it.
That's a great point. There's so many points you touched here about the part-time. Let's start there. Some faculty want to be a part of the team part-time. They think they add credibility. And then there's always a struggle between, if I'm a grad student or a postdoc, if I become the CEO, there's always this power struggle. This professor is like heavyweight. And how do people balance that chemistry? What worked, and in your observations? And
kick the professor out of the company, and whoever's dedicated to the company long-term should be the one who's the CEO, full stop. It's so obvious. And yes, there are many examples of professors coming and being CEO for a little while and then leaving and things working out. But I would say that's in spite of configuration, not because of the configuration. And so here's my view. If you're going to found a company, everybody sit around the table and look at each other and decide who's going to be around in 5 years. And of that group, you decide who are your true executives. And for those, it doesn't matter who's CEO, who's CTO. It doesn't matter at all, because you're working together as a team. And then if that doesn't function, like whatever. But that's the team. Everybody else is basically window dressing.
That early in the stage of the company, you're mostly going through technology issues, and by the time a real CEO comes in, I'm guessing it's more of a sales job, and it happens a few years down the lane.
Let's put it this way. So companies go through 3 stages. You're getting the enterprise version of the world, but they go through the product stage, they go through the sales stage, and they go through the operation stage. And every stage is very different. The goal of the product stage is to find product market fit. And when it comes to startups, that is the art. That is the one thing that there is no book, there is no recipe, there is no technology. The path is different for everyone. Some people have the gene, some people don't have the gene. And to find product market fit in almost every case I've ever seen, you have to be piped into the nervous system of the product, the market, and the tech trends. And that means every day you're there, and every day you're bouncing off walls and running into hurdles and getting kicked in the face. And the product phase can take years. In Nicira's case, I would say it probably took us 3 years to actually figure out what product was going to hunt.
And that was after forming the company or before forming the company?
After forming the company, about 3 years when we really figured it out. We were going to build a virtual networking solution for data centers. It took us about 3 years to understand exactly what that was, exactly what it looked like, exactly how to build it. It was a real effort. You want people in the company that will do that are fully accountable. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't go talk to professors who may help with technology, but they don't know anything about product market fit. It's almost like a negative thing. If they say anything like, oh, I think customers are going to like this, totally discount it. They haven't a clue. So that's the first phase. And then to your point, then you go to actually scaling sales and go to market. And that's when you want to hire someone that actually understands that. And that you can hire in. There's no art there. It's much more science. It's much more engineering. It's much more practice. And that you can hire into.
Let's go to your story, Nicira. What was your product market research like? And did you do that research before starting the company or after starting the company? How did that evolve the fit?
After starting the company. It was very clear that there was latent demand in the industry for more flexible networking. That was very clear. So we had a lot of like high level signs that if you build more flexible networking, there's a lot of potential applications. So for example, data centers were just getting built and they had a certain way that they wanted to route traffic. So that would be useful there. Mobile was taking off, cell or whatever, there's definitely application there. The enterprises were more focused on security, so there's potential application there, et cetera, right? So we knew that there was potentially applications. We just didn't know which ones there were. So we just kind of had a high-level academics view of like, we have this platform which is flexible. We knew there were problems. And then we started the company. And then it wasn't until basically the Great Recession set in that we're like, oh shit, we got to figure out in like the next year or two what this is, or we're going to run out of money. We were talking to all of these companies and we were looking for like, what is the thing that's the most pressing? And what happened upon, and this is after hundreds of customer meetings, trying to sell stuff, trying to understand problems. Here's what we found out, which is there was another big trend that was happening, and that was compute virtualization. So compute virtualization and specific server virtualization was happening in the data center. And so instead of workloads being spun up on physical machines, they're being spun up in virtual machines. And a virtual machine had a very different operating model than a physical machine, because you could spin them up, you could spin them down, you could move them around, you could snapshot them. There's this very flexible thing. It was soft state. But they were attached to physical networks that weren't. And so now you have all of these virtual machines that you could move them anywhere and you could do all this wonderful stuff, but they're attached to networks, network policies that you still had people to come and manage. And so there's a big mismatch. And I actually remember I had the aha. I was sitting there, I'm like, it's like every one of these virtual machines has a virtual port. In 2012, there's going to be more virtual ports than physical ports. And those virtual ports today aren't attached to anything that has the same type of flexibility as a virtual machine. If there's one thing we were good at, it was building programmable networking and software. That's what we did. And so we used the SDN background and to build virtual networks that had the same operating model as virtual machines. That was it. It was a trend. We knew that it was going. And ironically, or maybe prophetically, Nicira was acquired in 2012, and exactly the time that we predicted there'd be more virtual ports than physical ports.
You had more virtual ports when you're shipping the product by the time it got acquired. So you basically disrupted Cisco's business, I heard. Walk us through the need for creation of SDN. This is for the context for the audience here. What is the technology like at that point, and how are you different? The reason I'm asking this question is when somebody's trying to build a technology, they try to be incremental because it's familiar to the market. That has so many issues because you're building on so much shit that you might be incrementally better. How should people think about disrupting and innovation?
This is such a deep question, actually, and it's something I've thought so much about. And so I'm going to say a few things that may seem unrelated, but to me, get to the heart of this. It turns out, as a founder, you've got just two jobs. So job number one is you have to introduce a new idea into somebody's head. Think about like Leonardo DiCaprio Inception. And so you've got some constituencies that's out there, and they wake up and they think about all sorts of stuff, but they don't think about your thing. And your job is to get them to think about your thing. You're actually implanting like an idea. And that's incredibly hard to do, incredibly hard. And if that idea that you're implanting is too foreign, it'll never stick. People just don't know how to think about it. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. The second thing that you have to do is attach a price to that idea. And that's actually more well known how you do that. It's just a lot of work. This is kind of where marketing and sales comes in. Those are your only two jobs as a founder. Plant the idea, set a price on the idea. So when it comes to implanting the idea, you want the idea to be new and powerful, but you don't want it to be so foreign that people can't conceptualize how it helps them or how it has value. I'm going to use a little bit of computer science jargon here, but I think it's pretty simple, which is in computer science, you often have a choice between abstraction and virtualization. So abstraction is you create a new abstraction. That's your new thing. I'm going to create an abstraction that I'm going to call whatever, and then you attach value to that abstraction. The thing that's unique about virtualization, which is different, is you end up with the exact same thing that you start with. It's just more flexible. So in the case of abstraction, I could abstract a computer as, I could abstract it as something that has functions, or I can abstract a computer as, a big pool of memory. I mean, there's a lot of things I can abstract at, which is very different than the actual computer. I could just virtualize x86, and then you just end up with x86. And the conclusion that I came to as a founder is the idea I wanted to put in somebody's head, I did not want to change abstractions because it's just too different and people don't know how to do it. I wanted the idea put in the head to be like the old idea, just more powerful. So virtualization was what we went with. And so we built virtual networks. Virtual networks are just like virtual machines in that they're flexible. They've got all of the value of virtual machines. You can spin them up, grow them, shrink them. They look just like physical networks. They had L2 service model. They had 2 firewalls. And so I think a very important aspect of the success of Nicira is that the innovation that we chose was something people could really relate to, even though it was very, very powerful. And that was a very specific decision. Another thing we could have done is say, forget virtual networks. We're going to give you this thing called a cloud network that looks nothing like a virtual network, but it has all these other great things. Like you can use like high-level names to talk about it, which would be great, except for people wouldn't know how to think about that. If you're listening to this and you're trying to take an academic idea and you bring it out to the market, you really need to understand how people view their day-to-day chore, and you really need to find a way to slipstream into that. That is like the most critical aspect of success, even more than the innovation in my experience.
It's almost like giving them a better choice and make it easy to understand and don't make it too abstract.
That's right. People's jobs are hard. Being like, oh, you've got to kind of like rethink how you view X, Y, and Z. It's very unlikely you're going to get like the mental bandwidth needed to get there. But if you're like, hey, listen, you think about this thing, keep thinking about that thing, but imagine if it could do this. That's just much easier because they understand how it impacts their broader workflows, the ecosystem around it, their job, et cetera. And so I think this was probably the most critical decision when it came to the success of Nicira, that even though we're doing software-defined networking, we could have built anything. We could have built a programming language that would have created a network. So instead of like using switches and routers, you write a new language. But the chances that would have been adopted are zero. They're just zero.
Talking about adoption, were people jumping up on your product, SDNs? And I heard you say somewhere that it was easier to sell the product than to give it out for free. So I'm assuming you tried giving it out for free. What happened there?
It's actually much easier to sell something to give it away. Remember I told you as a founder, you've got 2 jobs, create an idea and attach a value to it. Part of attaching the value to it is what people get it for. And if you have something entirely new and you give it to them for free, they'll value it at basically nothing. But they also have no commitment to that, whatever you gave it to. They've got no skin in the game, and they don't even know how to think about the value. So if you charge, they'll inherently think that there is value. But not only that, like once they have it, they have some ownership to make it successful. And so it's not as simple as you go to somebody and you say, here, buy this thing. You have to identify a real problem, whatever. But it's much easier to be taken seriously. And it's a great qualifier for people that'll waste your time if you charge for money. Now, we always had good engagements. From the very beginning of Nicira, we always had people willing to pay us money, people willing to work with us, people willing to adopt. But in many cases, they really just wanted access to myself and the team. They wanted us to teach them what to do. They wanted us to kind of explore the landscape with them. Often they didn't really know why. They just knew something buzzy was going on. And we could always find something where we could add value, but none of it was like kind of repeatable. It wasn't until we locked on to the virtual networking thing that things just took off. It's almost like we found the right idea, the right abstraction. And then from there on, I mean, we 3x'd the company every year until I left. I mean, from when that took off for about 4 years. I mean, it ended up being a very big business. I think the business now at VMware is a $2 billion a year business. It's huge.
Were there any inflection points that happened that speed up the process for Nicira?
That was the key. Here's specifically the product that the market needs and how you articulate it. And once we did that, things really started to move. And it's interesting, actually, before this, and just because it's been a while, I actually went through my old board decks. I looked at my Series B board deck, which was done by Andreessen Horowitz. Ben Horowitz is on my board. We were one of their first investments. And I looked at the timeline that I laid out on the board deck. We actually nailed it perfectly. By then, so this was in 2009, we'd been at it for 2 years. We figured out what we were going to build, and we built it. It took those 2 years to really understand it.
It's almost like counterintuitive for scientists. I think we are used to free stuff in academia. To put a price on that, and it reminds me of Mark Andreessen, who says, like, increase the price. It doesn't come easy to academic scientists. I don't know for other people, me for sure. How do you teach this to academic entrepreneurs about you need to price it high?
I wish I would have had some exposure to business before I started my company. Like, I wish I would have worked for a VC or worked for a startup. I mean, I was a government labs guy. I didn't know anything. And at least for the enterprise, companies are shaped by their go-to-market motion. startups are shaped by their go-to-market motion. The go-to-market motion is shaped by the procurement process. Like, how do companies buy? And once you understand companies buy, all of this makes sense. I mean, they have budgets, they need support, they value things. I don't know the answer to your question, except for what I would say is I wish I had more exposure to that. And I'd recommend anybody that's starting, like if you're an academic and you're starting a company, take the time to understand the nuts and bolts of like a go-to-market, how companies acquire things, how other startups have done it. And then it's actually, I think, pretty straightforward.
Maybe trying to work for a company is a better idea than before starting one?
For sure, if you have the time to do it, for sure, right? The problem is you only have so much time in a life. And I think that people that join startups actually get a lot of exposure to this stuff, especially if you're in product, especially if you run product, or you're close to the product team.
Startups are a great place to learn. Like I keep telling this to postdocs and grads, and I'm like, instead of going and doing that second postdoc or third postdoc, go join a startup company. You'll learn so much more valuable things in life than being in academia. Let me go back to you spent about 2 years building the product. And how do you balance timing of when a product is released and the persistence? How long do you keep going at something? People say like, never give up. And there's something called timing. Like if it isn't an economic downturn, it's a downturn. Like how do you balance those?
I know founders that have chipped away at a startup for 10 years and it didn't work. I know a company now, again, I don't know if I can mention it, so I won't. They were basically going out of business every year for 8 years, and then they hit it, and now it's totally taking off. I mean, it's just gone asymptotic. This is a massively underdetermined system. There is no answer. You do not have the data. There is no predictability. There is no way to cut your loss. I mean, like none of that. There's no way that you can know how long to work and when things will take off. If that was the case, whatever, go become an investor and become really rich. Nobody knows the answer to that. I think at the end of the day, this is a personal choice every founder needs to make on how much do they believe versus how much they're willing to commit. That said, there's a failure mode on the other side here, which is, I do feel like, listen, if you're a founder and you're raising money and you're hiring a team, you have some commitment to the people that you've taken money from and the people that you've hired to see things through. And that doesn't mean to like stay forever, but that means to give it a good go. And normally 2-3 years in, you'll have a good idea of whether this market is going to work or not, but it takes about that much time in the enterprise. And so this is one of those things I wish I had an answer to, which I don't, but I don't think there is an answer. I just don't think it exists.
Again and again, when you try to pitch to a VC, they're like, oh, why now? The timing and how long? And it's a hard question. That's what the point was. And I just wanted to hear from you.
Here's the good news. The good news is that the ability to move to market is getting more and more founder friendly because products now can kind of sell themselves. And before you had to hire a sales team and have the conversation and there's this kind of like voodoo ritual you had to do. Now, if you've got a good product and technology, you can put it on a website, do some basic marketing or even just content marketing and see if people like it. Open source was an early version of this, and now all the bottom-up SaaS companies are. And so I think that we are getting earlier and earlier signs. Before, it was like literally like raise $20 million, sit in a room for 4 years, come out, hopefully people will buy it. That's what it used to be. Now it's get something up in a freemium version as quickly as possible and see if it hunts. I mean, I think the world's coming your way, but again, it's a real-time commitment.
I wanted to close the loop on one thing, the team. You were basically at a point where you're the only one in the building and you had to start building the team all the way to getting acquired. Walk me through the process. Like, what did you do right? And who helped? Everything about team building.
Scott Schenker and I built the original team, and I think we did a very, very good job. We probably had 12 people by the time he decided to peace out. And that team stuck with me. The entire team stuck with me to the very, very end. Listen, I mean, it was all the normal stuff. I mean, it was all the talent, all the dedication, all the hard work, hiring the people that you know that will stick around, that you know that you trust. I didn't know I was doing that. We did it, and I'm so grateful that we did. Later on, I learned something, and I learned it probably too late, which is like, listen, if you're in a leadership position, whether you're a founding CTO or you're a CEO, the reality is in a company at the exec level, the only person that should be learning on the job is you. And the reason that you have the ability to learn on the job is because you bring to the table that technology or vision or whatever. So like, that's why you deserve to be in the room. Everybody else in the room should know exactly what their function is because they're not bringing that. If you're building out your exec staff, I think it's much, much better to hire into total expertise that you can rely on than somebody that's going to be trying to learn with you and making the same types of mistakes. By the end of my tenure, Nicira journey end to end was a decade. a little more actually. By the end, I really got that. And everybody that I worked with was a stone cold killer and way better than I was at like with their function, way, way better than I was. And I wish I would have kind of done that earlier.
And how did you evolve as a leader? You start with nothing, with zero experience as a founder, as a businessman, and to the CEO. How did you evolve? And are there lessons for other CEOs and CTOs about evolving into roles?
Steve Mullaney. I was very, very lucky. I hired a CEO who is just a phenomenally talented leader, a phenomenally experienced leader. He had no ego. He brought me along. He taught me how he thought. He had great mental models. I mean, I was just very, very lucky.
How did you find Steve?
He was the interim CEO at Palo Alto Networks. He was a longtime VP of marketing, interim CEO of Palo Alto Networks. I think it was Andy Ratcliffe that knew him. Like one of the board members knew him and made the intro. We talked to so many potential CEOs. And most of them just weren't good fits. They didn't understand technology. But it's just one of these things where like when you know, and he knew the space, he had the energy, he was very low ego, communication was fantastic. And then after all of these meetings, all of these people, things actually moved pretty quickly. And then honestly, I don't know if that's repeatable at all. I feel incredibly lucky that I got him. And there's many professions that have massive state space, and being a CEO, founder, leader is one of them. The space is so enormous. I don't think there's any book you can read. I don't think you can like look at it from the outside. I think you really need to be attached to somebody like a Steve to really get it, or you just learn on the way and make a lot of mistakes. And I was very fortunate to have the former.
How do you check for egos when you're trying to pick a leader? It's like dating, you try to put up your best face.
When I hire execs, I look for a few things. The most important is everybody has blind spots. I'm always curious if people are aware of their blind spots. And I don't care about the blind spots. I just want to know that they're aware of them and not defensive about them or hide them or whatever. So that's a very important thing. The second thing is I also need people that can make decisions, because decision velocity is so important to a company. And I think both of those things are reflections on ego. To know your blind spots and be open about them and hire people that are good, that shows a relatively low ego. And the ability to like make a decision or whatever shows sufficient confidence in yourself. I mean, so I think there's a reflection on that. But then, in the case of Steve, I think I resigned myself during the process to just speak the truth, because it was going to be a hard job. And I knew if somebody came and left, it'd be very disruptive. And so we had like very, very plain talk. And somebody that will engage at that level, you have very honest conversations. There's no kabuki. There's no showmanship. There's no selling. And, it was like literally we would sit down and whiteboard together, and you get a real sense of people doing that. And listen, if you're a founder and you're hiring, you learn that you're selling all the time. You're selling to get people in the job. You should never do that with a core exec, and certainly not if you're bringing a CEO. You should just talk like you're talking to an advisor, and you'll understand what that person's made of, because it's a heart-to-heart conversation.
You touched upon this topic called decisions a few times now. What did you learn about decision making as an entrepreneur and now as an investor? There's so much uncertainty. Decisions, it can make or break things. And how did you evolve and learn?
As an operator, you make lots of decisions and you realize a lot of them are wrong, and then you just correct them. And this all sounds very cliche, but all the cliches are true here, which is like you can't be attached to your own decisions. You have to admit when you're wrong. You have to keep making decisions. If you're scaling yourself out, the most important thing that you're actually hiring into is decision capacity. Who can make decisions for me, right or wrong? I actually don't care if they're right or wrong. And then correct the decisions if they want. The decisions need to be fully accountable. They need to own them. They need to be able to correct them. All of leadership is just basically decision capacity, and scaling companies is decision capacity. As an investor, it's actually very, very different. You've got very, very few decisions that you make. And so I haven't found any answer to that other than just doing the work. You just do a ton of work prior to each decision.
Maybe it's a good segue into asking, like, were there things that you thought as an entrepreneur, I'm like, why the hell is this investor behaving this way? Why is this advisor asking these things and you're doing the same things now because there's a reason behind it? Like, how did you take a couple of examples? Like,
I'm a very bad patient in general, right? Like if the doctor tells me to do something, like I all right. I'm the same way as an entrepreneur. I couldn't imagine being on my own board. That was terrible, And so listen, I didn't listen to anybody, man. I thought nobody knew, and I knew the way. And I learned kind of a lot of hard lessons. And I realized over time that there's some people that really do know. And man, I was so lucky to have Ben Horowitz on my board. He just sold software to HP. He had just come from the trenches. So he really, really knew what he was talking about. And over time, it became very apparent. And then I really listened to him. And so I think it actually really does matter having board members that have been there. I actually characterize board members in one of three ways. I think the mean board member, the average board member, has never been an operator, is a relatively smart person. They're kind of net neutral. They don't add a lot of value. They don't take a lot of value. They're good people. They'll help work or make connections or whatever, so they're fine. The worst board members are those that are frustrated operators and they want to run the company like they would run the company. And so they'll kind of backseat drive and tell you what to do, but it's not your way. And then every once in a while, you get a great board member who really empathizes and understands what you should do, but realizes you're the one that has to do it. And so they frame the problem for you to give you the right mental framework to do that. And Ben was the third one. And I was very, very lucky to have that.
That's so rare, I think.
Very rare. That's right.
Yeah.
I aspire to be the third one, but admittedly, sometimes I slip into the second one. But I try my best to be the third one these days. Provide mental frameworks that founders can use to make decisions.
Let's go a bit deeper into that. Tell your modus operandi. Like, how do you work with entrepreneurs now? If you have an academic entrepreneur, even better, but otherwise, it doesn't matter.
These days, I let the entrepreneurs drive almost everything. By that, I mean, I don't come a playbook. I don't push them in areas they're not comfortable. I find once a child psychologist told me that a child will never ask a question that they're not ready to hear the answer to.
I have a 2-year-old, I know.
No. Sometimes you're in these very serious life situations. They're asking very serious questions. You're like, oh man, are they ready? And I feel the same thing for entrepreneurs, which is I do think entrepreneurs know where they need help and when they need help. And then I really try to provide the framework that I think is very helpful. And also, I've seen now enough businesses that I always try to give them a heads up on things that are going to be an issue. Like I try to be like the ghost of Christmas future. It's midnight, wake up. You're going to run into like your ARR is going to flatten at 50 million because you're focused on a certain sector or something like that. So those are kind of the two roles that I really try and play. Provide the mental framework when it's asked, and then try to give a heads up on things that tend to be problematic. Other than that, I just try to be a fiduciary, which is like be a good board member, represent them. I think, again, like unless you're really piped into the nervous system of the product or the market, it's very, very hard to provide actionable advice. And so I'd rather default to not.
I wish more advisors do that, board members.
Yeah, me too. So, sitting on a bunch of boards, trust me.
This brings me to other topic, conflicts. How did you deal with conflicts, and the lessons learned in this process during Nicira and your post-life as an investor?
We take at A16Z conflicts very seriously. I remember even after we sold Nicira, I was sitting in VMware and Ben Horowitz sent me an email and he's like, hey, listen, we're looking at this company. Is it a conflict with you? And like that meant so much to me because like, man, life is so hard as a founder. It's like you against the entire world, man. If you're an investor, invest in another company that marginally conflicting, it's infuriating, man. Like your life is hard enough. And to be that sensitive, even after you've been acquired, meant a lot. And so, listen, we take conflicts very, very seriously. Like you can't avoid them in all cases. Sometimes companies pivot. Sometimes it seems like a conflict, but it's really not. Sometimes a company doesn't know what the other company is actually doing. And so the last thing to say about this is it actually turns out that most things you worry are a conflict just end up not being. Markets tend to be very large and companies tend to be very specific. And so there's very few truly conflicting companies. Listen, we're very aware of them. We're very sensitive to them. But like in practice, it tends to be less of a problem than you think.
It all falls under this big umbrella called leadership. Like, what are the leadership lessons you learned in this process?
Oh, boy.
Go back to the beginning. Like, what did you not have? And by the end of that journey, and even now, it's a learning process, right?
Oh, man. I mean, this is a whole book. There's so many. This is in no particular order. It's just one that tends to be very prescient. Some leaders view leadership as a bank where they keep making promises and they keep accruing a technical debt in that sense. They're basically using technical debt to keep people motivated. And that has a time limit. And if you feel yourself running into that trap, you just shouldn't do it. Employees tend to both prefer, but also operate much, much better if they're treated like peers rather than someone that you're trying to control and dole out information to. I didn't know this. I always thought leadership was a thing that you did. The good leaders, they do this stuff. And I would see John Chambers, and he was up there talking and whatever, that's doing leadership, quote unquote. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that you and a group of people are on a shared journey together, and you need to provide vision and guidance, but you need to provide it as well as you understand it. You don't need to sell it. And then together you'll make decisions. One of these kind of harder lessons to learn. I really have internalized that.
You must have done a great job with 12 people stuck with you throughout the journey, and they rallied together, right?
I was lucky to have remarkable people. We ended up, of course, much larger, but yeah, the original 12, man, they all stayed through the whole thing.
you're talking about through the end of the journey, like exits. How do you view exits? Like, so you were pitching to Ben Horowitz, and what did you think about an exit at that point? Like, what are the lessons for entrepreneurs how do they present exit?
I mean, I'll just say go after large markets. That's what I'll say. The market dictates everything. I mean, I've been in Silicon Valley for a long time. I've started 2 companies. I've been a GM for, a $500 million product. I've sold a lot of product. I've shipped a lot of product. Like, I've done all this. I had no idea how tech worked until I became a VC. I just hadn't a clue, man. Unless you see the experiment in that many ways, you just don't get it. And one thing that's just so painfully obvious is that markets create companies, not the other way around. I mean, it's just really true. And like, these days, I almost liken it to a forest. There's some forests that you look at them and you're like, wow, all of these trees are like scraggly and none of them are very tall, look desiccated. And it turns out they're just not in fertile soil. And then you go to these other forests where it's just like all of the trees are just massive and great and whatever. And they just happen to be in like this amazing topsoil or whatever it is. And it's the same thing with markets. Like today, if you look at the data market, all the companies are doing well. They're like Snowflake, great. Databricks, great. Fivetran, all these companies are doing fantastic. And then there's these other markets where everybody's starving for oxygen and nothing's working. Markets are everything, man. They really are. Yeah, I know you asked about exits, but like choose the right market, the rest will follow.
Yeah. I talked to a number of investors and they all like look at PhDs and they're like, oh, it's another research project. Or it takes a long time to come to the market. Or they love the technology too much that there's no market reality. How does a PhD navigate this and present themselves better?
Well, there's some truth to it.
There is truth. That's why I brought up those things. Yes.
There's some truth to it. I mean, PhDs can make phenomenal CEOs and founders, right? Look at Ali Ghodsi at Databricks. Look at George Fraser at Fivetran. Man, the guy was a PhD in neuroscience, man. He's just absolutely crushing it. I mean, I was one. You can have PhDs. The thing that you're drawing from in the PhD is a very small subset of what you ended up sharpening, which tends to be clarity of thought and then just persistence because, whatever, like a PhD program is like a tribal bloodletting ritual that's kind of pointless. So is doing a startup often, right? And so like, I think that's kind of like what you end up drawing from. There's one piece of advice given to myself and I give to you that are listening is I would have really understood what it means to build a business. And I would have viewed that as a first-class problem. It's actually probably a more difficult problem than you're solving in your PhD. And like one of the biggest mistakes that PhDs think, and I thought this too, is like whatever your research was, like, oh, it's so complex and you're so smart. Trust me, business problems are harder, more complicated. If you walk in respecting that, if you walk in respecting that the degrees of freedom, the complexities of the business challenges are as tough as yours, and you have some knowledge of that, you'll be in a fantastic position to raise. And honestly, I think you'll be in a differentiated position from all the other founders as far as your ability to execute.
Thank you so much for that. To my closing questions, what are a couple of lessons you learned during Nicira that others could benefit from? Any mistakes that you'd like to avoid?
My uncle was actually a very famous photographer in the 70s and 80s. He had a McCarthy Genius Fellowship. He married George Gershwin's niece and he basically disappeared from the map. And he just meditated for like 30 years. He like followed Krishnamurti to this out of the way place and he meditated for years. And he still does photography, but he doesn't really show it to anybody. And so I've been visiting him over the years. And he's got these just beautiful pictures that he kind of hangs up all over the place. And one day I asked him, like, how do you choose a picture, right? Like, how do you do that? And he says, you know what, Martin, when I go out and I do photography, I just randomly take pictures. Sometimes I don't even like look. I'm just like taking pictures. And then what I do is I load them all on my computer. I look at them all, and there's some of them I like, and I print them out and I put them on the wall. And so my walls are always covered with all these pictures. And then, Martin, I just live with them. I live with them when I'm in a good mood and a bad mood and like different seasons. And some over time, I decide I don't like them and I put them away. And others, they persist through all of that. And the good photos are the ones that, like, no matter what, you still like. And I've found that to be the most powerful way to think about making decisions, like really serious decisions, like career decisions, product decisions. It's like you have to live with them for long periods of time. So what I do is I talk. I think out loud and I bring people in and I just talk and talk and talk about the decisions that I'm contemplating and the ones that will persist for months. Whether it's a product decision, it's a hiring decision, it's a strategy, it's the ones that I keep talking about, I keep coming back to, and I haven't, like, those are the ones that I go with. And so I think it's a very, very powerful way for you to make these kind of bigger decisions, whether it's deciding to start a company or what you do once you're in a company.
That's a great lesson. Hey, Martin, thank you so much for this. This was a pleasure, a blast, and what a gift to be able to talk to you. Thank you for your time.
All right. Likewise. I really appreciate it, and I'm honored to do it. Thanks so much, Naresh.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Lab to Startup podcast. You can find links to the resources and programs mentioned in these episodes, connect with Naresh, or subscribe to this show at labtostartup.com.